The Secret Beneath the Forbidden Stone. In the year 1904, British archaeologist Edward H. Collingwood stumbled upon a peculiar structure during an excavation in southern Mesopotamia. This building was unlike any known temple. It matched neither Sumerian, Akkadian, nor Babylonian architecture. The local villagers referred to it as the Whispering Well. They claimed to hear murmurs rising from beneath the earth at night. No one dared approach it. The soil seemed as if it had been covered not 100 years ago, but just the day before. They were neither cuneiform nor hieroglyphs. The script felt alive, curved, organic, as if carved by the hand of a god. Those who forgot me summoned the darkness. Those who erased my name erased themselves. No known source mentioned such a name. Edward immediately recorded the inscription. Inside was a sphere lined with black glass. But anyone who looked into it did not see their own reflection. That night, Edward decided to stay at the site. While his assistants reluctantly returned to their tents, he continued to examine the sphere. It wasn't a human voice. The words made no sense, yet they sank into his subconscious. It was like a dream, but he was awake. His assistants called out to him. No response. When they entered, there was no Edward, and from that day forward, the sands around the dig site began to stir after dark. The Faceless Ones. After the disappearance of Edward H. Collingwood, the excavation site was officially shut down. Ottoman authorities archived the incident as a natural case of disappearance. But in truth, everyone involved in the dig was silenced. He kept whispering the same sentence over and over. There was someone in the dark, but he had no face. He never had a face. 17 years later, in 1921, Edward's nephew, a young researcher named Thomas Collingwood, came into possession of his uncle's notebook. Within its pages were detailed drawings of the stone slab, annotated symbols, and a sketch of the black sphere. Using these notes, Thomas pinpointed the exact location of the excavation site. It was now known as the Black Plain. Locals claimed the sands still moved at night and that sometimes in the middle of the desert they lost sight of their own shadows. During the day, only the wind howled. But when night fell, he stepped outside under the moonlight but saw no one. The slabs were gone, but in their place was a blackened ring in the soil. It was a human skull, but with no eye sockets. Someone had deliberately erased every detail of the face, and then he heard a voice behind him. Those who forget me shall have their faces erased from time's memory. Someone, something, was speaking inside his head. He turned around. No one there. But his shadow. That night, Thomas couldn't bring himself to write in the notebook. But the next morning, he discovered a sentence carved into the wall of his tent in his own handwriting. When Tarsil returns, not even names will survive. The silence of Tarsil. From the moment Thomas began forgetting his name, he stopped keeping a journal. Nothing he wrote made sense anymore. The letters would dance on the page, words would lose their meaning, and sentences would erase themselves. When he looked into the mirror, his face was still there. A crowd of faceless beings standing around it. They stared at him. None of them spoke, but all of them were screaming. Its surface was carved with curving symbols, similar to those on Edward's slabs, yet different. The stone was alive. That night, Thomas sat by the campfire with the stone in his hands. It wasn't just a name. It was a command, a summoning. The sky changed. Tent poles trembled. The ground hummed. Something was crawling beneath them. Thomas stood up. But Thomas knew it was him, not just his shadow, perhaps what he was becoming. The other tents were empty. He couldn't remember his assistants' names, or their faces, and finally, Thomas understood. Tarsil wasn't a god. Tarsil was a void, the embodiment of all things forgotten. To speak his name was to erase yourself. And in that moment, a thought carved itself into Thomas's mind, though it felt like his own. There is not only fear in the dark, the place where identity fades. Thomas had completely lost track of time. Nights grew longer, but mornings never came. Even when the sun shone outside his tent, no light entered. His shadow was gone. Or worse, what had once been his shadow now belonged to something else. But always faceless. A single phrase kept echoing in his head, looping endlessly. He who has no face is not remembered. One day, when Thomas stepped outside his tent, someone was standing there. A woman in white clothing. Her hands trembled as she traced symbols in the air with her fingers, then erased them. Thomas took a step forward. Black liquid oozed from her fingers as if she had pierced the earth and touched a deeper, hidden reality beneath it. It was more than a word. It was a key. He tried to write it in his notebook, but Hatra had been forgotten too, because Tarsal had erased her. Only the name remained, not the being, and perhaps, but this time he was outside himself, watching. It had no mouth, yet a voice echoed from the sky. With each echo, someone turned to dust, until only Thomas remained. But he no longer recognized himself. He tried to wake. But when his eyes opened, he was no longer in a tent. He was in a room lined with black stone, but it watched him. It had no voice, but it spoke. You no longer carry your name, but you still carry me. This is a beginning. And in that moment, he understood. To serve Tarsal, one didn't need to worship him. Forgetting was enough. Those who remember will also be forgotten. Thomas didn't remember how he got out of the black stone room. Maybe he never did. Maybe he was still there. The tent still stood, but no people remained inside. The beds were flat. Time itself seemed frozen. Inside one of the tents, a journal lying on the ground seemed to call out to him. But among them, one single page stood out. Will also be lost. And at that moment, Thomas realized there was no escape from forgetting. In fact, sometimes, maybe Tarsal was a defense mechanism of the human mind, a response to overwhelming truth. But whatever it was, Tarsal was too conscious to be just an idea. The stars weren't just falling, they were moving, as if the sky itself was a veil being pulled back. But this void wasn't silent. It whispered with a hum that chanted his name, but not quite. Taram, Taros, Ta. None of them were his real name, or maybe they used to be. A monolith of black glass engraved with twisted symbols. Around it, dozens of shadows appeared. Others seemed pulled from forgotten childhood memories. All stood silently. All stared at him. And then, the monolith spoke. But the voice came from Thomas himself. I did not choose you, but you remembered me. Now, you too must be forgotten. Thomas collapsed to his knees. His consciousness unraveled. He tried to hold on to his name, his face, his voice, but it all slipped away, like grains of sand in a river. A final scream rose in his mind. Who am I? But no answer echoed back. Only a whisper remained. Tarsal, do not speak the name. When Thomas opened his eyes, there were no tents, no stones, no sky. He was drifting through a gray void, no ground, no time. Whenever he tried to think, the thought vanished before it arrived. Sentences scattered, words slipped from their meaning. Then, a voice, neither male nor female. You are no longer a being, you are a mistake. In that moment, Thomas realized something. Tarsal had never fully revealed himself because Tarsal wasn't a void. He was the awareness of the void. He had been erased from sacred texts, not because he was a god, but because he was a warning. And now, Thomas had become that warning. Suddenly, the darkness receded. Thomas was no longer seeing through his own eyes, but someone else's. This person was a newcomer, a young archaeologist who had rediscovered the excavation site in the 2020s. His name was unknown. But in his bag was an old journal, the lost notebook of Edward H. Collingwood. The new archaeologist unearthed something half buried in the dirt, a sphere of black glass. He placed it in his bag. At that moment, something changed. The camera footage glitched, the audio turned into static, the video froze. But we, the viewers, we now know, because on the final page of that notebook, a sentence is written. Tarsal is not a name. Words begin to appear slowly on the video screen. Pray you do not forget who you are, before your face disappears. The video ends, but the one who watched it is no longer alone.